Her family made her marry. Her sister's Comatose, billionaire fiancé. Then, everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. Have you ever been forced into a situation that changed your life forever, just because of family pressure? Imagine being asked to marry someone you've never met, someone who's in a coma, simply to preserve your family's honor. That's exactly what happened to our main character. Let's go back to her story. As Emma sat there, the minutes felt like hours. The hospital room, which had once seemed so sterile and impersonal, now felt suffocating, almost as if it was closing in on her. She couldn't stop looking at James, lying motionless in the bed, his face pale and almost serene, but completely unaware of the turmoil that was swirling in her heart. Every beep from the heart monitor, every small movement of his chest, made her wonder if he could somehow sense that she was here. Could he hear her? Was he aware of the weight she was carrying on his behalf? She couldn't shake the thoughts that kept running through her mind. She had been thrust into this position by her family, by circumstances, and though she had agreed to marry James, part of her still wondered if she was doing the right thing. Was this what she really wanted? Could she ever learn to love someone she had never met, let alone someone who was currently unconscious? As she reached out to adjust the blanket over his legs, her phone buzzed again. It was another message from her mother. Asterisk. Remember, this is for the best. The family will be forever grateful. Asterisk. The words hit her harder than she expected, as if the pressure wasn't already enough to bear. The family's legacy, their business, everything rested on her shoulders now. The weight of it all felt too much. Emma stood up and walked toward the window, gazing out at the busy streets below. The world outside was moving, people hurrying to and fro, unaware of the chaos inside the hospital room. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. There was no turning back now. She had made her decision, but it didn't make it any easier. Her thoughts wandered back to her sister, the one who was supposed to be here instead of her. Her sister had been the perfect daughter, the one who always had her life together. She had the perfect fiancé, the perfect future. And now, all of that was gone, taken in a split second by a tragic accident. Emma had always lived in her sister's shadow, but she never thought it would come to this. To be the one to marry her sister's fiancé, to be the one to carry on her sister's life. Emma knew she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She had to find a way to get through this. But how could she? She didn't even know the man lying in front of her. She had been forced into this role, this position, and part of her resented it. She resented being a substitute, a stand-in, but at the same time, a small part of her wondered if this could be her chance to finally step out of her sister's shadow. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something new. She turned back to look at James, still unconscious, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to hope. What if he woke up? What if he didn't remember their engagement, their marriage, and they could start fresh? She quickly pushed the thought away. That wasn't going to happen. James was the man her family had chosen for her, and she had to accept that. She couldn't afford to have any more fantasies. Just then the door opened, and a nurse stepped in, her soft shoes clicking on the floor. "Miss Brooks," she said with a kind smile, "we're going to need you to sign some papers." Emma nodded, standing up. "Of course," she said, her voice steady but distant. She followed the nurse to the desk in the corner of the room, where a stack of documents awaited her. The nurse handed her a pen, and Emma signed her name, the letters feeling foreign as they appeared on the page. She had signed countless documents before, but this one felt different. This one sealed her fate. As she finished, the nurse gave her a sympathetic smile. "Don't worry, Miss Brooks. Everything will be okay. He's a strong man." Emma forced a smile, but the words didn't bring her any comfort. She had no idea if James was strong or not. She didn't even know if he would ever wake up. But she had no choice. She had to believe that everything would be okay, even if it didn't feel that way. With the papers signed, Emma returned to James's side, sitting down again. She took a deep breath and looked at his still form. The weight of the decision she had made was heavy on her chest. She had agreed to marry him, but the question lingered. Could she ever truly love him? It felt impossible, but in the quiet of the room, with the soft hum of the machines and the distant sounds of the hospital, Emma allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. For the first time since this all began, she let herself imagine a future with James, one where he was awake, where they were not bound by family duty but by love. But that was a dream, and Emma knew better than to indulge in dreams. She had a role to play. The future wasn't hers to decide, not yet, at least. She would do what was expected of her. But somewhere deep inside, she couldn't help but wonder. What if her heart was capable of more than she thought? What if this wasn't just a marriage of duty, but a chance for something real? She looked down at James once more, her thoughts swirling. There was no going back now. But maybe, just maybe, the future had more in store for her than she could imagine. Days passed, and Emma's routine remained largely the same. She woke early, spent the day by James's side, and then returned to the sterile, lonely apartment she was now calling home. Every day she signed papers, met with lawyers, and attended family meetings. The weight of her obligations was never-ending, and the reality of her situation began to feel more like a dream she couldn't wake up from. Still, she did her duty, as expected. She sat by his bed, talked to him about her day, even though she didn't know if he could hear her or not. It felt like the right thing to do, as if this was the only thing she could do to hold on to some semblance of normalcy in her life. One evening, as she sat in the quiet room, watching the city lights flicker from the window, something unexpected happened. James's fingers twitched. Emma's heart stopped. She leaned forward, holding her breath, not daring to move. His fingers twitched again, and then, slowly, his eyes fluttered open. He blinked several times, his gaze unfocused, as if he was trying to make sense of his surroundings. For a moment, Emma couldn't believe it. Could he really be awake? Could he really be here with her, alive? She stood up, her hands trembling, and approached the bed. "James?" she said softly, almost afraid to say his name, as if speaking it might break the spell. James's eyes finally focused on her, and for a moment there was nothing but silence between them. He blinked again, confusion clouding his features. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice raspy, weak. Emma swallowed, her heart racing. "You're in the hospital," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "You've been in a coma for several weeks." James tried to sit up, but his body seemed uncooperative, weak from weeks of immobility. Emma rushed to help him, adjusting the pillows behind his back. She could feel his gaze on her, but she didn't know what to make of it. Was he confused? Did he remember her? Did he remember anything? He looked at her again, this time with more focus, as if searching for answers in her eyes. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but the question struck Emma like a lightning bolt. "I'm Emma," she said softly, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm your fiancé?" Low. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth, like she was speaking about someone else's life. She hadn't expected this moment, hadn't prepared for it. The truth was, she didn't know how to answer him. How could she explain everything to him in a way that made sense? James frowned, his brows furrowing in concentration. "Fiancé? I don't remember you." Emma's stomach dropped. Of course he didn't remember her. He hadn't even known her before the accident. He hadn't known about the marriage arranged by their families, the obligations she had now. She had agreed to this, out of duty, not love. But here he was, awake, and everything was suddenly more complicated. "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't remember. It's okay." "Well, they'll take it slow. I'm here for you." James seemed to relax slightly, as if her words brought him a little comfort. He nodded, though he still looked confused and disoriented. "I don't remember anything. I don't even know how I got here." Emma sat down next to him, trying to calm her own racing thoughts. "You were in a car accident," she explained gently. "You were in a coma for a while. But you're awake now, and that's what matters." He nodded slowly, still processing everything. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Emma shook her head, reaching out to gently touch his hand. "It's not your fault," she said softly. "You didn't ask for any of this." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Emma couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief that he was awake, confusion about their situation, and a deep sense of responsibility for everything that had happened. She had promised her family that she would marry him, and now that he was awake, she didn't know what the future would look like. As James lay back against the pillows, still trying to process his surroundings, Emma realized that the future had suddenly become uncertain in a way she hadn't expected. They were both standing at the edge of something new, something neither of them had prepared for. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. What if, just maybe, things could be different? What if, as James woke up and started to heal, there was a chance for something more than duty between them? She wasn't sure what the answer was, but she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be long, and it would be filled with challenges they had never anticipated. But for now, they had this moment, this small spark of hope, and for Emma, that was enough. The next few days were a blur. James was still adjusting to being awake, his memory hazy, and his body weak from the long weeks in a coma. Emma stayed by his side, trying to help him as best as she could, but she couldn't help but notice the distance between them. He didn't remember their engagement, their history, or even the bond that had been formed between their families. It was as if she was a stranger to him, and that was exactly what she had become. She tried to tell herself it was fine, that it was expected. After all, she had only agreed to marry him out of obligation, not love. But as the days passed, a strange feeling began to settle in her heart, something she hadn't expected. She found herself hoping he would remember her, hoping that, somehow, the connection they had was real. It was a Friday afternoon when Emma sat down beside James in his hospital room, a cup of coffee in her hand. She hadn't expected much to change. He was still recovering, still distant, but she had to admit that the moments they shared, however small, were starting to affect her more than she anticipated. "James," she said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. He looked up at her, his tired eyes focusing on her face. "Yeah?" His voice was hoarse, still not fully recovered, but there was something in it that made Emma pause. He was trying, she could see that. "I just wanted to know how you're feeling," she asked gently, though she already knew the answer. He had been in pain, both physically and emotionally. "I'm doing okay," he said, his gaze dropping to the cup of coffee in her hands. "Just tired." Emma nodded, taking a sip of her coffee as she studied him. She had been with him every day since he woke up, watching as he tried to piece together fragments of his past. But it was clear that the man lying in the bed was not the same person he had been before the accident. He was still the heir to a vast fortune, still the man everyone expected him to be, but his mind and his heart were somewhere else. For a moment, Emma thought about her own feelings. She had agreed to marry him out of a sense of duty, but she didn't know if that was enough anymore. She had been raised to put her family's needs before her own, to make sacrifices for the greater good. But now she was beginning to question if that was all there was to life. What about her? What about her own happiness? "Do you remember anything?" she asked quietly, hesitating slightly. James's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Bits and pieces," he said, rubbing his temple as if the effort of remembering caused him pain. "But not much. I remember the accident, but it's all blurry after that." Emma's heart ached for him. He was struggling, and she could see it in his eyes. "You don't have to remember everything right away," she said softly. "We'll take it slow." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to understand her better. "I don't even know who I am anymore," he admitted quietly. "It's like everything I thought I knew is gone." Emma felt a pang of sympathy. "You're still you, James. You may not remember everything, but you're still here, and that's what matters." He nodded, though his face remained troubled. There was a long silence between them, and Emma realized that, despite the distance, there was still something familiar about him, something that made her feel a connection to him, even if it wasn't the same as before. "Emma," James said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I know this is all weird, and I'm sorry. I didn't ask for any of this. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do now." Emma smiled faintly. "None of us do," she said. "We're just figuring it out as we go." James looked at her, his gaze softening. "I don't know what my life looks like now, but I want to try. I want to figure it out with you, if you're willing to give me a chance." The words hit Emma like a wave, and for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Was this the beginning of something new, something real? She wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long time, she wanted to believe that it was possible. She took a deep breath, her heart racing. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said, her voice steady. "We have time to figure things out." And with that, for the first time, Emma allowed herself to feel something other than fear. A tiny spark of hope, barely visible, but there. Maybe, just maybe, They could build something real together. Maybe, just maybe, this marriage could become something more than duty. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to face it. It had been a few weeks since James had woken up, and things had begun to shift between them, albeit slowly. Emma had become accustomed to their new routine. She would visit him every day, help him with his physical therapy, and spend hours talking about his recovery. Yet, despite the growing comfort they shared, something still felt incomplete. They were no longer strangers, but they weren't yet the couple their families had hoped for. Emma tried to push away her doubts, but they lingered in the back of her mind. What if she was only here out of duty, out of an obligation she could never truly escape? What if this never became real for her? James had made progress, both physically and mentally. He could walk short distances now, with Emma by his side to help him along. His memory was still fragmented, but he was beginning to remember small details from his past, his favorite foods, the places he had visited, and the people he used to know. But when it came to their relationship, there was still nothing to hold on to. He didn't remember the engagement, their shared history, or the bond they were supposed to have. One afternoon, as Emma helped him through a few exercises, she couldn't ignore the way her heart raced every time their hands brushed. He was a stranger, but he was still the man she was supposed to marry. The man she had promised her family she would marry. And yet, in the quiet moments when the hospital room was still and the world outside seemed so far away, Emma couldn't help but feel something she hadn't expected: a desire to know him, to understand him, to love him. After their session, Emma and James sat by the window, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the room. The silence between them was comfortable, but it wasn't easy. Neither of them knew how to bridge the gap that still existed between them. "Emma," James said suddenly, breaking the silence. She turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. He was staring out the window, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah? I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "I know things have been strange between us. I don't remember everything, and I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. But I want to make this work. I want to understand you, to understand times us asterisk." Emma felt a flutter of hope stir in her chest. Could it be possible? Could this still turn into something real? "I don't know how to do this," James continued, his voice vulnerable now. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when he was finally willing to try, to meet her halfway. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't how she had imagined it, but maybe it didn't have to be perfect. Maybe it just had to be real. "I'm willing to try too," she replied, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "We'll take it one step at a time. We don't have to rush." "Namalo," James nodded, the faintest of smiles tugging at the corners of his lips. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt like they were on the same page, like they were no longer just going through the motions. They were starting something new, together. Later that evening, after dinner, they sat down together in the living room of his penthouse. The soft hum of the city outside was a gentle reminder that the world kept moving, even as they were trying to rebuild their own world. James looked over at her, his eyes filled with something Emma couldn't quite place. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something more than indifference. It was the beginning of something: trust maybe, or at least the desire for trust. "I know this isn't how we imagined it," James said quietly, his gaze never leaving hers. "But I'm glad you're here." Emma smiled, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the first real acknowledgement of what they had been through, and what they were still going through. It was the first time he had spoken to her like they were partners, not just people bound by a promise. "I'm glad I'm here too," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And maybe someday, we'll look back at this and realize it was the start of something beautiful." "Lev." James reached over, his hand brushing hers, and for a moment, the silence between them was filled with a quiet understanding. They didn't need to say anything more. They both knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they were willing to walk it together. They had no idea what the future held, but they were ready to face it, side by side. In that moment, Emma allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with James, one that wasn't based on obligation or duty, but on something real. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was their story, and maybe that was enough. As the days passed, Emma and James began to find a rhythm together, a sense of normalcy amidst the uncertainty. James continued to recover, both physically and mentally, though his memory was still patchy. Some days he remembered small details about his past, and other days He felt like a complete stranger in his own life. Emma, on the other hand, had slowly started to let go of the weight of her obligations. She was no longer just the woman fulfilling a promise to her family. She was beginning to become part of James's world, a world she hadn't known before. It was a strange feeling, part fear, part hope, but mostly, it was a sense of something new beginning to take shape. One morning, as Emma helped James with his morning routine, she noticed something that she hadn't seen before, a small change, but one that made her heart flutter. James was more present now, his eyes focused on her when they spoke, his touch more deliberate. It was subtle, but it was there. They were no longer just two people going through the motions of a marriage they hadn't chosen for themselves. There was something between them now, something unspoken but real. As they sat down for breakfast, Emma caught herself staring at him for a moment longer than usual. He looked so different now. He was no longer the distant, confused man she had met when he first woke up. He was becoming the man he had once been, or at least the man he could be with her. "James," she said, her voice soft but steady. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I've been thinking." "About what?" he asked, his voice warm, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I don't know," she replied, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. I guess I'm starting to believe in us. In this. In times, what times we have." James's expression softened, and he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I've been thinking the same thing," he admitted quietly. "I know we didn't start this the way most people would, but I don't think that matters anymore. What matters is that we're here, and we're trying. I'm trying." Emma's heart skipped a beat. He was trying. That was more than she had hoped for when she first agreed to this marriage. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and maybe that was enough. They sat in silence for a few moments, each of them lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one that held promise. It was the silence of two people beginning to understand each other, starting to share a life they never expected to have. Later that day, Emma and James took a walk in the garden outside his penthouse. It was a beautiful day, the sun shining brightly and the flowers in full bloom. It was a stark contrast to the hospital room where they had spent so many weeks. James leaned on her slightly for support, though he was getting stronger every day. They walked side by side, not saying much, but feeling the connection between them grow with each step. "I'm glad we're doing this," James said after a long pause, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know I've been distant at times, but I'm glad you've been here with me. I don't know what I would have done without you." Emma smiled softly, her heart swelling with warmth. "You don't have to thank me. I'm here because I want to be here. Because I believe in what we're building." Dumlow. James looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma saw something in his eyes, something more than just gratitude. It was something deeper, something more vulnerable. It was trust. "Do you think we could have something real?" he asked, his voice quiet but hopeful. Emma's heart raced. It was the question she had been afraid to ask herself, the question she had been avoiding. Could they have something real? She didn't know. But as she looked at him now, as she saw the man he was becoming, she realized that maybe they already did. "I think we could," she said softly, her voice filled with certainty. "I think we already do." James squeezed her hand, a small smile playing on his lips. They continued walking, their footsteps in sync, as the sun began to set behind them. The future was still uncertain, still filled with challenges they hadn't yet faced, but for the first time Emma felt like they were walking towards something worth fighting for. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was their story. And for the first time in a long time, Emma believed it could be enough. As the weeks went by, Emma and James continued to grow closer, their connection strengthening with each passing day. The initial awkwardness had faded, and in its place, a tentative but genuine bond began to form. Emma found herself laughing more, her once heavy heart now lighter, and she realized that James was no longer the distant stranger she had once thought him to be. He had become someone she cared for deeply, someone she was beginning to trust with the pieces of her heart she had kept hidden for so long. One evening, after a quiet dinner in the dining room of his penthouse, James turned to Emma as they sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. He seemed deep in thought, his eyes fixed on the skyline. Emma noticed the shift in his demeanor. He was still recovering, still trying to find himself, but there was a new intensity in the way he looked at her. "Emma," he said, his voice softer than usual. She turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. There's something I've been thinking about for a while now, and I need to say it out loud. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Was he going to bring up the future? Was he going to ask her what this marriage meant? They hadn't really talked about it since he had woken up, and Emma had avoided the subject, not wanting to rush things or force a decision. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. James looked at her, his gaze unwavering, and for the first time, Emma saw vulnerability in his eyes. Not just the man recovering from an accident, but the man who was finally allowing himself to feel again. "I know we didn't start this the way most people would," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "But I want you to know that I don't want you here out of obligation. I don't want you to feel like you're stuck with me because of some promise you made to your family." "Tom?" Emma blinked, surprised by his words. She had always known this was an arrangement built on duty, on promises made by their families. But hearing him speak like this, hearing him acknowledge it, made something stir inside her. "I'm here because I want to be," she said quietly, her voice steady, but her heart felt like it was racing. "Because I believe in what we're building. I didn't know it at first, but I do now." James took a deep breath, his hand reaching out to gently take hers. "I don't know what the future holds, but I want to try. I want to try to make this more than just a marriage of convenience. I want to make it real, for both of us." Emma's heart swelled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. He wanted the same thing she did, something real, something that went beyond the confines of their arrangement. But she couldn't ignore the lingering doubt that had been growing in her mind. Could they really build a life together? Was it possible to fall in love when so much of their connection had started with a lie? "I want that too," she replied softly, squeezing his hand. "But I need to be honest with you, James. There are days when I wonder if it's possible, if we can truly move beyond the past and make something of this. But I'm willing to try. I think we owe it to ourselves to at least try." James smiled, a genuine smile that made his eyes light up. "That's all I'm asking for," he said. "A chance to make this work." They sat there for a moment, their hands intertwined, both lost in their thoughts. But for the first time in a long time, the silence felt comfortable. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from uncertainty or fear, but the kind that came from two people who were finally being honest with each other. "I know this won't be easy," James continued, his voice more serious now, "but I'm willing to fight for us. For what we could have. I know we didn't get here the way we planned, but maybe that's okay. Maybe it's time we stop worrying about how we got here and start focusing on where we're going." Emma nodded, her heart full of emotion. She had always been afraid of the future, of what it might hold. But now, sitting there with James, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe they hadn't started this journey the way they wanted, but they could choose how to move forward. They could choose to make it their own, to create something real from the ashes of their past. "I'm ready to face whatever comes next," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "Together." James smiled at her, his eyes full of warmth and affection. "Together," he echoed. And for the first time since they had started this journey, Emma truly believed that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, they would face them as partners. Together. Weeks passed, and with each day, Emma and James seemed to grow closer, their connection becoming undeniable. James continued to make progress in his recovery, his memory gradually returning in fragments. He remembered the sound of his favorite songs, the taste of coffee in the mornings, and the warmth of his mother's smile. Yet when it came to their relationship, everything remained a blur. The promise they had made to each other, the bond they were supposed to have, was still something he couldn't grasp. Emma, too, had started to wonder where this journey would take them. Could their marriage, which had begun as a formality, truly transform into something real? Was it even possible to build a life with someone who didn't remember you, who had no recollection of the foundation you were supposed to share? One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting warm shadows across the room, Emma found herself lost in thought. She had never imagined that her life would take this turn, that she would find herself married to a man she didn't know, living in a world of uncertainty. But now, as she looked at James sitting beside her, his presence comforting, his smile genuine, she began to realize that, maybe, this wasn't as impossible as it seemed. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something together. "Emma," James said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was softer than usual, filled with a sincerity that caught her off guard. She turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. "Yeah?" she asked, trying to steady her breath. "I've been thinking," he began, his eyes searching hers as if weighing every word. About us. About this life we're trying to build. I know I've been distant at times, and I know I don't remember everything. But I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work, no matter how difficult it may be. Yogo. Emma's heart swelled with emotion. She had never heard him speak like this before, so raw, so open. She could see the effort he was putting into their relationship, the vulnerability he was allowing himself to show. And for the first time since they had started this journey together, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could turn into something real. I want to make this work too, Emma said quietly, her voice steady, yet filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. I've been afraid of what the future holds, but I think I'm ready to face it now. We've come so far and we've been through so much. I don't want to let fear stand in the way of what we could have. James smiled, his eyes softening. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know I want to try, with you by my side, he said, his voice full of determination. We may not have started this in the best way, but we're here now, and that's what matters. Emma nodded, feeling a wave of warmth wash over her. She had been so afraid of the unknown, of the uncertainty that hung over them, but hearing him speak with such conviction gave her the courage to believe in their future. They had both been through so much already, and yet here they were, still standing together, ready to take the next step. As the evening wore on, they sat together in comfortable silence, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Emma rested her head on James's shoulder, feeling the weight of the day lift as she closed her eyes. For the first time, she felt like they were on the same page, like they were both ready to embrace whatever came next. I've been thinking, James said again, breaking the silence once more. Emma looked up at him, curious. About what? She asked. What if we did something together? He asked, his voice filled with excitement. What if we started something new? Maybe we could start a project or even take a trip somewhere just for us. It doesn't have to be anything big, but something that's ours, something we can look back on and say, that was the moment everything changed. Emma smiled, her heart swelling with affection. She had never expected him to suggest something so spontaneous, so full of life. It was the kind of moment she had been waiting for, the moment when they could stop worrying about the past and start focusing on the future, together. That sounds perfect, she replied softly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Let's do it. Let's start something new. And with that, Emma realized that, for the first time in a long time, she was no longer afraid of what the future held. Whatever challenges they would face them together. There was still so much to discover, so much to experience. And as long as they were together, Emma knew they could overcome anything. They didn't have all the answers yet, and there were still so many unknowns. But for the first time, the future felt like a promise, not a threat. And as they sat there, side by side, Emma knew that they were just beginning to write their own story, one that was filled with hope, love, and the possibility of a bright future. As Emma and James embarked on this new chapter together, life began to feel less like a series of obligations and more like a shared journey. The uncertainty that had once clouded their path seemed to fade away with each passing day. They found themselves laughing more, enjoying the simple moments that had once seemed impossible between them. Emma noticed the small ways James began to open up more about his past, the pieces of his life he was slowly reclaiming. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like they were truly starting to build something of their own, together. One morning, after a long walk through the park, they sat on a bench, looking at the peaceful water in the nearby pond. The sun was shining brightly, casting a soft glow on the world around them. For a moment, Emma felt like she was in a dream, one where everything had fallen into place. She turned to James, her heart full of emotion. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought I would feel this way. I thought I would always be caught between duty and my own feelings. But now I'm starting to believe that we can have something real. I'm starting to believe in us." James smiled, his eyes shining with warmth. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I've been thinking the same thing," he said. "We've come so far, and I know it's been difficult, but I think we've found something special here. I never imagined this would be my life, but I'm glad it is. I'm glad it's with you." Emma smiled, her heart swelling at his words. It had been a long road to get here, filled with uncertainty and fear, but in this moment, she felt a deep sense of peace. They had worked through the toughest parts of their relationship, and now they were finally starting to build a future that was uniquely theirs. "I'm glad it's with you too," Emma said, her voice filled with sincerity. I think we're stronger because of everything we've been through. And I know there's still a lot ahead of us, but for the first time, I'm not afraid." James leaned in, his forehead gently resting against hers. "We're not perfect, Emma," he whispered, "but together we make something pretty great." Emma closed her eyes, savoring the moment. She had once believed that love had to come from perfection, from meeting all the expectations of family and society, but now she realized that love could also come from something far more authentic. It could come from understanding, from vulnerability, from growth, and it was in those small, imperfect moments that she had found the love she had been searching for all along. "You're right," Emma said softly. "We're not perfect, but I think that's what makes us perfect for each other." They sat there, side by side, watching the world go by, knowing that their future was no longer a distant dream but something they could begin to shape together. It wasn't going to be easy, nothing worth having ever was, but with each other, they knew they could face whatever challenges came their way. As the sun set, casting a golden hue over the park, Emma felt a sense of calm wash over her. They had made it through the darkest of days, and now, as they held hands, the future felt bright, full of possibilities, and full of love. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said, her voice steady. "Together." James squeezed her hand once more, his heart filled with the same certainty. "Together," he echoed. And in that moment they both knew that no matter what came next, they had found something real, something worth fighting for, and they would face the future side by side, hand in hand.